represented the characters of an alien language. One is called Kiki and the other one Booba. But which one is which? You are now forced to pick. Don't think about it, don't doubt yourself. Just choose. Are you ready? If you thought that the first one was Kiki, you're not alone. The overwhelming majority of both children and adults across the globe, regardless of their language or culture, would agree. Since its creation about 100 years ago, this phenomenon was tested in all sorts of circumstances, and it seems to hold. The relationship between characters and the properties we attribute to them isn't random. There seems to be some sort of rhyme and reason behind it all. But perhaps those researchers made it too easy. What if it doesn't actually happen like this? Why don't we try it with English characters instead? Again, suspend all judgment and think of the letter A. Take your time, picture it in your mind's eye, think about its color. Are you ready? If so, can everyone who saw A as blue please raise their hand? Okay, good. How about yellow? Interesting. Can we do red now? Whoa! The overwhelming majority of you think of the letter A as red. And again, you're not alone. Research shows that when forced to pick a color for the letter A, the vast majority of individuals would choose red. So it works for real letters too. Apparently, not only is not the association between characters and shapes random, the association between characters and their color also isn't random. So it works for real letters too. Isn't that weird? Apparently, language has this weird way of influencing even our most basic perceptions, but we walk around completely unaware of it. At least, most of us. For a small percent of the population, maybe some of you here, all this is completely obvious. Those few experience what we call synesthesia. The word synesthesia comes from Greek, from syn, meaning together, and aesthesia, like in anesthesia, meaning sensation. Synesthesia is just that, the neurocognitive phenomenon where one sensory modality, such as taste, touch, texture, involuntarily triggers another, giving rise to a sort of merging of the senses. As you can imagine, the combinations are almost endless, giving rise to dozens of distinct types of synesthesia. Londoner James Wannerton, for example, has sound to taste synesthesia. So, every day on his way to work, riding the subway, he goes on a gastronomic journey. With each station, a specific taste and texture appear in his mouth. So while for us, his journey may be from Westminster to Tower Hill, for him, it goes from chocolate mints onto tomato soup, then spam fritters, only to arrive at his final destination, ginger beer. There's also sound to touch synesthesia, where specific sounds or aspects of music trigger actual physical sensations in the body. So for example, when listening to Smells Like Teen Spirit, the bass can be felt as a light pulsation in the chest, while the drums are felt like electric zaps, traveling throughout the fingers. The type of synesthesia I would like to focus on today is grapheme color synesthesia, where the letters, characters, and numbers of a given language are perceived as inherently colored. So D is seen as sky blue, while Y is seen as sparkling yellow. And although this may not sound as exciting as tasting subway stations, I'll show you why it's still worth talking about. I'm aware that this all may sound quite bizarre and frankly like the work of some science fiction genius, but synesthesia is a genuine phenomenon, documented all the way back in the 1800s by Sir Francis Galton. What's more, synesthesia is not all that rare. Previously thought to affect 1 in 2,000 individuals, more recent evidence suggests that 1 in 23 individuals experiences some form of synesthesia. So what is it like to experience synesthesia? Well, although non-synesthetes may experience some color-letter associations more often than not, as we saw before, for a synesthete, the experience is as real and automatic as any other. For a synesthete, the letter A could be no less vermilion than the letter standing here behind me. And although some specific associations might differ between synesthetes, the synesthetic experience for the synesthete remains constant throughout their life. This is in fact one of the core ways to diagnose synesthesia. The synesthetic experience must be consistent. If your A is this specific shade of vermilion today, it will be this specific shade of vermilion in 10 years' time. The synesthetic experience is also involuntary. It happens whether you want it to or not. It's unidirectional, meaning that graphemes invoke color, but color doesn't invoke graphemes, and it's automatic. It happens completely without effort or intention, and it has a real impact on the way people perceive the world. Perhaps you've stumbled upon one of these pictures before. Whoops. Here, the goal is to see the different characters, and as you can see, this is no easy task. Well, how about now? The F's clearly pop out. Indeed, studies show that synesthetes can see the different characters almost instantly, segregated from the background, and perform better than non-synesthetes on various visual search tasks. Synesthetes are also found to use their unique senses as a mnemonic device or a memory crutch. So, while at a conference like we are now, a synesthete, much like everybody else, might struggle to remember your name. Unlike others, however, they might remember that you have a blue name, and after quickly sifting through a few options, they might think, "Ah, Daniel it was." Indeed, synesthetes are better in various association tasks and memory tasks than non-synesthetes. Synesthesia, however, isn't always an asset. Experiencing two different sensations, which are possibly conflicting at the same time, the real and the synesthetic color, might cause interference. For example, synesthetes really get mad at you when you get their colors wrong. This goes beyond the occasional side-eye. It was studied in the lab as well. An experiment called the strobe task revealed that when showing synesthetes a bunch of letters in their right colors, they're much faster to recognize that color than non-synesthetes, while the wrong colors actually bother them. So, as you can imagine, if you gather a couple of synesthetes in a room, a big disagreement ensues. While one could be convinced that B is baby blue, another could be certain that it's brown as a bear. While for one, T is 100% tomato red, for another, it's more of a burnt sienna. So, although very fascinating and interesting, these disagreements go beyond pure fighting. If you add 100 more synesthetes to that room, something fascinating happens. They figure out they have more in common than previously thought. Specific patterns emerge, and scientists have been trying to identify the rules behind them. Some rules are more obvious than others. For example, color words often invoke their own color. So R is typically seen as red, and Y is typically seen as yellow. That also holds for characteristic association words. D stands for dog, and dogs are brown, so D is brown. Other rules are more complex and might provide a unique window into both synesthetic and language development. As we saw before, shapes and graphemes aren't randomly associated. There's a pattern between the two. That also holds for synesthesia. So O is often seen as white, while X and Z are often seen as black. Furthermore, studies show that letters with curved versus sharp features are more likely to be associated with warm versus cool colors. Acoustic properties also play a role. Suppose that you map all the vowels of a given language onto space, as shown here, so that the acoustic similarity between the two is reflected in their distance from one another. In that case, the synesthetic map tends to mirror that map, so that the more similar two sounds sound, the more likely they are to have a similar color. Thus, but how do we know which rule is at play where? And what if two rules contradict each other? Looking into different languages can help us untangle this mystery. In English, A is for apple, and apples are red. A is a warm sound, and red is a warm color. A is the first color of the first letter of the alphabet, and red is the first color of the rainbow. So all signs point to red. But that doesn't hold for different languages. In Spanish, the word for yellow, amarillo, starts with an A. So perhaps A should be yellow. In Dutch, A is for ape, and apes are brown. So perhaps A should be brown. In Korean, A isn't the first letter of the alphabet. G is. By comparing and contrasting different languages, we can see that in both Spanish, Dutch, English, the letter A seems to be red. But in Korean, A isn't red, G is. So, regardless of its acoustic properties, its semantic properties, the way it looks, the first letter of the alphabet seems to be red. So different languages can help us disentangle synesthetic rules. Interesting. But zooming into the differences between those languages, some important regularities pop up. Pronunciation, for example, successfully predicts color-letter associations in Spanish, Japanese, perhaps in Bulgarian, but not in English. How come? Well, if you were me in the second grade, you could easily think of the reason. There I was, freshly into school, just started to learn English, and my parents decide to sign me up for a spelling bee. I go onto the stage and I get my first word. Tail. A panic enters my eyes. Which tail exactly is it? The tail at the end of fairy tale, T-A-L-E, or the tail at the end of a dog, T-A-I-L. The clock is ticking, I'm panicking, I take a long shot. T-A-L-E. Wrong, I get disqualified on the first try. Obviously, it wasn't just the English language's fault. I wasn't destined for a spelling bee champion, but those of you who are native speakers of Spanish, Japanese, and Bulgarian know that this just isn't a struggle that we normally encounter. For those languages, most of the time, pronunciation is very similar to spelling. This property is called orthographic depth, and using some complex formulas, we can quantify exactly how difficult it is to pronounce words in a given language and how difficult it is to write them down. Indeed, research shows that the more easy a language is to pronounce, the more orthographically transparent, the more the pronunciation rule dominates in synesthesia. So not only can we use languages to study synesthesia, but the differences between those languages shows up in synesthesia as well. Furthermore, we can see that much of the development of synesthesia mirrors the development of language itself. Ordinarily, the language learning process is governed by the laws of practice. The more we hear a sound, the more it's solidified in our minds, inhibiting in turn other potential sounds. That is why the older we get, the harder it becomes to nail the new language's pronunciation. Practice becomes the main driver of language acquisition, and it cannot be undone. Once we become adults, our brain has already rewired itself to accommodate our experience. So researchers are left scouring for artifacts. But with synesthesia, they don't have to scour. They can simply look at the associated color. Because synesthesia develops in sync with the language learning process, it becomes its real-time snapshot, which is evident well into adulthood. Female synesthetes, for example, tend to associate their initials with the color pink, reflecting their childhood favorite color. Non-synesthetes, however, tend to associate their initials with their current favorite color, because for them, on the other hand, color-letter associations remain flexible throughout development. More generally, looking at how language differs, we can see that language is used as a framework for complex perceptual experiences, including both simple sensory experiences, such as vision and audition, and higher-level abstract entities, such as semantics, ordinarity, and beyond. So far, we've been talking about using language to study synesthesia, but to the effect that research shows us, synesthesia reflects the language learning process. Then, when we look at the differences between languages, we can see that not only can we use language to study synesthesia, we can use synesthesia to study language instead. Currently, researchers around the world are trying to disentangle the rules of synesthesia, and I'm proud to say I'm one of them. Leveraging Bulgarian for its unique script, grammar, and pronunciation, I hope to shed more light onto their role in synesthesia. And in turn, by tracing the associations of Bulgarian synesthetes, I hope to discover more so how it has shaped the way I and millions of others perceive the world. More research is needed to get us there, but in 5, 10, or 20 years' time, I hope to stand here before you and show you exactly how synesthesia paints language on the brain. Thank you.